Glenn Canena. I'm the editor-in-chief at Nexmo, the Vonage API platform. And the topic of our virtual discussion today is the future of customer engagement. We'll be discussing 3 key communications trends that are having a major impact on how businesses interact with their customers. To provide insight into these trends, I'm joined by 2 experts with deep knowledge of communications. First, the author of a Nexmo blog post that inspired this discussion, Head of Platform Marketing, Francisco Kattan. How are you, Francisco?
Good. I'm doing well, Glenn. Thank you. Happy to join.
Great. Thanks for being with us. And also, Director of Voice Products at Nexmo, Roland Selmer. Hi, Roland.
Hey, Glenn. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for joining. All right. So I think just to set the table, we should start with you, Francisco. You wrote the blog post with this same title. Can you talk about the 3 trends that you see shaping the future of customer engagement?
Yeah. So, as I wrote in the article, we see 3 important trends in customer engagement. One is contextual communications. And this means that the contact between customers and companies is driven by the context in which the interaction was initiated, such as why you may be contacting the company or maybe what device you're on. We see is omni-channel conversations. And here the idea is that the interactions between a customer and a company become a continuous conversation regardless of which channel is used for each interaction. So for example, if a brand sends you a message about a package delivery and you decide to call the company back, then the contact center agent should know that you are calling about that package delivery. And the third one that we see is what we call human plus. And here the idea is that artificial intelligence becomes more useful and bots actually support the conversations that we have with human agents rather than replace those agents. So the combination of a live agent plus the power of artificial intelligence will make for better conversations that improve customer service and make agents more productive.
Great, great. That's an interesting point you made about AI enhancing and making agents more productive rather than replacing them, because I think that's maybe a fear that's out there about AI becoming so advanced that human beings are no longer needed.
Totally, yes. No, we think it augments the human interaction and it makes it more relevant, it makes it more interesting and more productive and actually more natural as well.
Okay, great. And so what's fueling these trends as you see it, and why do you believe they'll be so impactful? Because you identified 3 among a lot of different developments going on in communications.
Yeah, so these trends are being fueled by the need of companies to provide a better experience for customers. And also, frankly, by recent advancements in technology, specifically, we think cloud communication platforms, artificial intelligence. So if we look at cloud communication providers, we see that they are making faster progress. They're innovating faster than traditional equipment vendors. And because their capabilities are now available as API building blocks, rather than just package applications, companies are able to more rapidly innovate. And then with artificial intelligence, we think that AI is now at a point where most consumers are comfortable having conversations with computers. And so that's fueling that trend as well. So, these advancements, we believe, will have the most impact in B2C type industries, especially the ones that are experiencing the most intense competition and where improving the customer experience is critical to retaining customers. I'd say, for example, industries that are being disrupted by the digital natives, such as financial services, transportation, travel and hospitality, and retail to start, as these companies need to defend their customers from the digital natives that are disrupting them. But over time, we see every industry adopting the same trends.
Thanks for that overview, Francisco. So let's dig a little more deeply into each of the trends that you identified, and I'll switch over to you, Roland, and ask for you to just kind of describe in a little more detail what contextual communications are.
Sure. So probably the best thing to do would be to start with kind of a formal definition of kind of contextual communication. And so quite a long-winded one would be something like contextual communication is the bidirectional transfer of information between two parties, where both parties are aware of the relational, environmental, and cultural context of the exchange. And that's kind of a very formal definition, but if you want to do kind of distill that down into something, it's really about both sides actually knowing what the conversation is about. For instance, if you got a call from somebody and the CLI was blocked, the identity of the call was blocked, it said unknown, there would be no context to that information. And so you'd say, hello, like who's talking? What do you want? And all those questions kind of allude to building a context around that conversation. But if you received a phone call, for example, from somebody within your address book, say from your friend, like John's phoning you, you kind of know what that's about. So there's a bit of extra context in there, but you wouldn't actually know what John wanted to speak to you about. And if we kind of extrapolate that further into kind of customer interactions, if we start making calls from within apps and people on the other side who are supporting those calls know that, for instance, somebody is calling from within an app, they kind of know who's calling and why they're calling. So that kind of is a super overview of the kind of continuum of context within a conversation.
Right, great. And you sort of alluded to this towards the end of your answer, but thinking about that within the context of customer engagement, right? If I'm a brand and I want to have a conversation with my customer, what does that look like, just in terms of a use case or a scenario?
Sure. So just to allude on that question, if we think about kind of two forms of communication, or at least the way in which they're used, if we think of comms as core, and by comms as core, I mean really the companies like Viber, WhatsApp, Skype, where if, for instance, I would just call Glenn or Francisco, and we'd have a general conversation just like we would on a normal telephone network. There's not much context around that. Whereas if, for instance, we start talking about companies that use what we call comms as a feature, we're really talking about things like sharing economy or symmetrical marketplaces. I guess companies like Airbnb or Uber, where comms is really a feature within the application itself. And so if I'm a driver in Uber and Glenn's a passenger, and Glenn's trying to get hold of me to find out where I am, and I receive a call, there's a lot of context around that conversation already within that app, right? I'll know that Glenn is a rider. I'll know that he's booked. I'll have his rough location, and we'll be able to have an immediate conversation around the context of what we're trying to achieve, which in this case would be ride sharing. So I think that's how kind of contextual communications is going to evolve, certainly from kind of a comms as feature point of view.
Great, thank you for that. And so talk a little bit more about kind of the technology that would need to be there to sort of enable this, right? So we've talked up, I think at a pretty high level, which gave great context. But sort of what has to be there, sort of under the covers to make this work?
Sure. So if we go back to kind of pre-internet days, I guess the main technologies that kind of we all used to were normal telephone calls, right? We used to call each other on what's commonly referred to as the PSTN, the public switch telephone network. But these new, kind of the whole app economy has brought quite a few new technologies that for instance, that we're even using within this call, right? And one of those technologies is a technology called WebRTC, where the RTC bit stands for real-time communication. And these technologies are a group of protocols and codecs and technologies based predominantly around IP communications. And so you're able to have very high quality, very high definition video, very high quality audio, higher quality than the PSTN itself, due to the technologies involved. And these have now been kind of rolled out for various platforms, available for various platforms, mainly around iOS, Android, and on the web. So, for instance, the conversation we're having now on this broadcast is really around WebRTC that we can use to speak to each other over great distances, obviously over IP. And so these technologies have really brought down kind of the barrier to entry to what traditionally, 5-10 years ago would have been really high-end broadcast quality, really expensive communication products. So it's really kind of a democratization of kind of high quality communication that are now enabling these quite exciting new use cases.
And so I want to transition to another trend that seems closely related to what you've been talking about, and that's omni-channel conversations.
Sure. So take a step back and think of just like a single channel kind of retail experience. People used to kind of earn their money and then go to the high street and go to a shop and kind of buy stuff and leave, right? And then as kind of society evolved, we started having more and more channels where potentially, we had kind of a multi-channel environment where, you could go and buy things in a brick and mortar store, but you could also have a web presence. And kind of the omni-channel is really any customer contact point that you could really think of. So it could be bricks and mortar, online, TV, mobile. And if you think of a customer user journey, there are now multiple kind of omni points of customer contact. Someone could be having a conversation with somebody on WhatsApp, discussing, let's say they're buying a pair of jeans, talking about some jeans. They might Google it on their phone on the way to the shop. They might go to the shop and actually have a look. They might use an app from the store to maybe make a purchase decision, and they might at some point on the web want to return those products. So we have this whole kind of omni-channel customer contact experience. An example I've given you now for retail, but I guess it pertains to kind of service sector type products as well. And what is really useful is technologies that allow the retailers to kind of have a consistent view of the customer along that journey. We've all experienced, for instance, when, let's say, we've gone into our bank and we've spoken to them about our account or something like that, and then a couple of days later we've called them and tried to discuss the same problem that we're having, and we have to recreate that context again. We have to say who we are. We have to give all these weird password hints, authenticate ourselves, and that kind of is a negative user experience. Having to recreate through all these kind of omni-channels, recreate that context of who we are and what we're trying to do. So what would be great is if we could start to see products where, regardless of the channel that we interact with brands and service sectors, that the context is always easily replicable, and we don't have to kind of recreate. We don't have to get into what we call these kind of context recreation loops. And if we can achieve that, I think this really leads to much higher engagement, better user experience, and overall kind of better customer engagement.
Right. And, another kind of a scenario that a colleague of ours had described that really made it clear to me was the idea of a business traveler who has some rewards program because they travel frequently, but that rewards program ties in flights, and it ties in hotel, it ties in a number of different services. And like you said, the touch points for all those services are on the phone, they're directly in person. And if the company that offers that rewards program could have a single view of that customer and all those touch points and provide the appropriate context each time they go to the car rental place or whatnot, the user experience would be so much better. And I think you're completely right about the engagement of that user.
Exactly, and that's what we try to build here at Expo, right? We're very focused on this whole concept of kind of contextual communication. We're working very hard on building kind of contextually aware APIs right now. And interestingly, there's kind of an anthropological reason for this, right? Whenever we interact with a brand who kind of seems to know what we're trying to achieve, or who recognizes us, there's what we call these kind of dopamine events that occur. So it's actually quite a biological reason why these things are successful.
I think I've experienced the antithesis of that.
It works both ways. So,
all right. So the other trend, and Francisco, I want to return to you.
Sure.
This is the final trend, was the human plus conversations, and you explained it up front about what it is, but maybe just dig a little bit deeper into how maybe a human agent in that scenario can tap into an AI service and become more productive with that kind of access.
Yeah, the idea with Human Plus, right, as I mentioned earlier, is that artificial intelligence can be used to augment the capabilities of human agent, right, not replacement. So we're all familiar in the past with the traditional use of machines to automate highly repetitive interactions, especially within a contact center, right? So in the past, if we wanted to check our balance, our bank balance, we would have to wait in queue, then finally talk to an agent, and then finally find out what our balance is, after probably a lengthy conversation to figure out who I am and why I'm calling, right? And so, we've seen things like IVR in the past automate those kinds of very repetitive, mundane type of interactions. And so machines have already automated those kinds of capabilities. What we see with Human Plus now is the ability of machines to help not only automate more complex interactions that are maybe not repetitive in nature, that require more cognitive ability, but also help the agent solve those highly complex problems that come up occasionally in a contact center. So let's see, as an example, let's say that you're talking to an agent, and then an AI bot is magically listening into the conversation. And you get to the point where the agent doesn't have an answer, or doesn't have all the context for the conversation or for the question that the agent, that the caller is asking about. Then you can imagine the AI bot quickly doing a query behind the scene and then popping up information on the agent screen so that the agent can guide the user through the answer to his or her problems, right? And this would all be done without the user really realizing that there was, an AI bot behind the scenes helping this agent.
Mm-hmm.
Another example that you might imagine in a contact center is sentiment analysis. So imagine again this AI bot magically listening to a conversation, where I as a customer may be calling my bank, and for whatever reason I'm upset about what happened, trying to get a fee overwritten or something like that. I'm getting upset. Then the AI bot behind the scenes can detect the fact that I'm upset and automatically notify a supervisor. The supervisor can then quietly be conferenced into the call, and then behind the scenes help the agent, so that the agent in the end provides a good experience for the consumer. So the agent is working behind the scenes, just analyzing what's going on with the call, and if necessary, taking action, right? Whether it's providing information on a screen or conferencing in someone else, maybe even taking notes, right? Or transcribing a call for future analysis.
And so I'm also struck by, I'm asking for these use cases and scenarios, and they all sound great, but it's also, I think, worth pointing out, and Roland, maybe you can say a little more about this, that, in an API economy, really the brand or the business is sort of armed with the API calls to deliver these different kinds of communications messages, but they can build, really think of on top of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a strategy that we've taken with Nexmo, right? So, for instance, when we launched our WebSocket endpoints for our voice API, it really allowed us to, and our customers as well, to leverage all the kind of best-in-class AI products out there. Things like IBM Watson, which we did a great integration with the Into project. And I think as long as you get access, voice is such a natural interface. It's probably, obviously the most natural way that human beings connect with each other. So just kind of alluding to the stuff Francisco was saying, there's countless use cases where we could leverage, or our customers could leverage, kind of best-in-class AI engines, and as kind of neural networks and kind of AI technology progresses, I think we're going to see some really great things like real-time translations. So you'll be able to kind of phone any store in the world, regardless of what language they speak. In fact, Vonage has a kind of proof of concept application that does that already, where it's almost like a real-time Babel type product, where you could speak to people in different languages, and you get a kind of in the background, like a third person kind of saying the translation. I think it really opens up the scope for, as we mentioned earlier, augmenting existing kind of human interactions. It really allows small organizations to scale very large. As Francisco talked about earlier, you won't even know when the transition has happened between, say, an AI chatbot where you're asking about certain products, and there becomes a point where it transitions to kind of a human operator, which will really help to kind of triage and scale there. In the case of, like, say, a support infrastructure, really scale beyond what traditionally they would be able to offer from just pure kind of a human basis. So really exciting stuff.
So, what I'd like to close with is, let's say I manage a product that makes contact with our customers, or, I'm the head of digital experience at company XYZ, and these trends sound like something I really need to leverage for, my own products and reaching out to my own customers. So I'd just like to get from either one of you, whoever wants to start first, what are the considerations from a business aspect that, decision makers on the business side need to think about if they want to sort of, harness these trends?
I would really say, so I'd start with what I've just said in terms of, if I have, for instance, a kind of a scaling type issue, what technologies can exist where I don't just have to add more agents and therefore increase my cost base. I think there are really intelligent things we can do now on the kind of cognitive computing side of things. And I would just say, really focus on how I can delight my customers by the examples that we gave earlier, maintaining context between the interactions at the various touch points between my brand and my consumers. And I think those kind of problems are really addressable now with the kind of technologies that we've been speaking about. And ultimately, that's really going to lead to higher customer engagement and kind of higher customer satisfaction. So cognitive commerce is a really big topic to look at now. Contextual communication is another, obviously, one we kind of mainly focusing on in this talk. I think those two areas certainly would be, something people should be looking at.
I'd like to add a couple comments, Glenn. So I would say in terms of advice for, especially the large enterprises that feel like they're under threat by new digital natives. Right? The digital natives have the advantage that they're starting from scratch and they don't have much of anything in terms of legacy. So they have all built their customer engagement platforms all based on API building blocks. So the advice for the larger enterprises is to start experimenting with API building blocks and start small. It's like, so every company already has interaction with a number of channels, primarily voice and probably email. So start with one new channel. The next channel that you add, maybe it's a social interface to WeChat or to Facebook Messenger or to Line. Rather than deploy a package application, as you may have done in the past, experiment with building blocks, API building blocks for that one interaction channel. And as you gain more experience, you can then over time begin to innovate around the existing legacy channels, whether it be IVR or the customer service desktop as well, so that you can then integrate all of the interactions in an omni-channel way, so that you can retain context across all the conversations in a way that's supported with AI bots. But don't try to solve the entire problem all at once. I would say start small and then expand from there.
Okay, thank you, Francisco and Roland, for a great discussion. Francisco Kattan is, again, head of platform marketing at Nexmo, and Roland is director of voice products at Nexmo. If you'd like to find out more about all of the innovation that's happening in the communication space, you can always read more at the Nexmo blog. That's nexmo.com/blog, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.